Picking up where we left off in the last video, we created our data models, and in this tutorial we'll be looking at adding controllers, views, and taking a general tour of the files that help us through our web programming. Now, Microsoft gave us quite a few generated files and folders. They gave us a nice folder structure. It is something like a skeleton or a guidance system, if you will. It is not hard and fast that your project must look like this, because as you go along, you add things, you remove things, so your folder structure may vary from this. But at the end of the day, once you create an MVC project, this is the general folder structure that you get. Now, I'm going to go through the folders. We can take a little tour and fully appreciate exactly what we have. So in the app start, we have a few code files. Those are essential to the actual startup of our application. They have some preprocessors, set up routing configuration, some identity stuff, some bundles for our styles and scripts. I'm not going to get into the details of those, but we can just have an appreciation of what is in app start. If we look at content, we see that we have a few CSS files. Out of the box, MVC5 comes with Bootstrap, kind of integrated and built in, so your web application has that Bootstrap look and feel by default. You can actually remove it if you wish, and you can update it if you wish. You can do whatever once it's there. They also give you another standard CSS file, which is yours to edit at will. Best practice would have you create another CSS file and override styles in Bootstrap as opposed to editing the Bootstrap file. So that is why they would have given you another one where you would add your own custom styles and additional things to make Bootstrap more customized and more personalized. In the controllers folder, we have 3 controllers, and we can deduce from the naming convention that the controller name would be some word, in this case account, and the word controller. And if you look at all 3 files, you notice that they all have that same format. Some word, in this case home, and the word controller. Manage and controller. So if you're going to create a new controller, you should have whatever you're calling it and ending with the word controller in camel case. All right. Fonts, those are generated, those are coming with Bootstrap, because throughout the internet, not every computer is going to have the font that you would like to display. So it's always good, at least in modern day web development, to include the fonts file with your project so that the server loads the font as opposed to the client machine. So that's why that is there. I would advise you not to delete it though, unless you have a game plan. We went through models and we saw where we have our different class files, and we added our database entity model. So we have a bridge to our database. We have a scripts folder, which plays host to a bunch of scripts, mostly jQuery scripts that are needed to complement our Bootstrap scripts. We also have Modernizer and Respond, which help with the responsiveness and the backwards compatibility for more HTML5 stuff for older browsers. So all of this stuff comes pre-packaged with the web project. You don't have to add these things manually. All right, so here we have our views folder, which plays host to our Razor View files with the extension .cshtml. I guess it's saying C# and HTML combined. That's exactly what Razor is. Now, I want you to appreciate the correlation between the folder names here in the views and the names of the controllers. So we're going to look at the home controller and appreciate that correlation. So we have a home controller, which is a CS file. And a CS file is just a class file. As you see, it's really just a class inheriting from a base class called controller. And in it, it has functions, methods, procedures, whatever keyword you use to identify them, it has those. They all return some type called action result, and The return value for an action result is view. Now what this is doing is establishing that for every method you have here, you should have a corresponding view file. And that is what this returns. So when you send a request for index from the home controller, it will search through the view folder and then look for a folder with the corresponding name, home, and then it will look for a controller with a view. It will look for a view with the corresponding function name, index, and then it will return it. So that means if you have a method here and you have no corresponding file in a corresponding folder, then you will get something like a 404 error. But we will get into that and explore all of that in a few minutes. So I'll just take a look at index really quickly. Now our index file, I want you to appreciate that it has purely HTML things in it, apart from this section, which is preceded by this @ sign. Once you see an @ sign, that means you are about to superimpose C# into your HTML. All right, so remember it's a CS/HTML file, so it's allowing about a bit of C# and it is merging it with HTML. And I'll just do a quick example of putting C# in this. I'll just put a quick if statement. So @ sign if a, let me just quickly, this is just by way of example, just to show you how Razor works. So it actually allows me to create, syntax error. It allows me to actually superimpose C# code right here in my HTML. So that is the relevance of my CS/HTML or Razor View file. Another thing to note is that we don't have that traditional skeleton. I call it a skeleton, where every HTML page should start with our doc type and our head and our body tags. We don't have that here. None of these view files have that. That is because they are all inheriting from what we call a layout file. And we'll get to see the layout file in a few. But what I really want you to see and appreciate is the fact that each file here, the name corresponds with the name of the method that is in the controller. All right, so once you have a method name, once again, you need to have a corresponding view file in a folder which has a corresponding name to that controller. All right, so let us just take a tour and finally press F5, the moment we've all been waiting for. So we will browse. So it may have taken a while, but once you're here, we want to take a look at how Visual Studio and ASP.NET MVC are aiding us to create a fully functional data-driven website. Now, this is our index page. The cardinal rule for me when it comes to web design is that all pages should be called index once it is the intended home page. All right. Now, our index page, if you look at this and we look at the code, we'll see the correlation between what is here as content and what was on that page. We'll also see that we have a little Bootstrap theming going on. We're using the Bootstrap nav, Bootstrap buttons, even the font is coming from Bootstrap. Everything is integrated with Bootstrap. Now, I want us to also appreciate that this is loading from localhost. It's not loading from your local file sets as it would be if you were building a regular HTML page. Visual Studio is actually conjuring a session of IIS Express. IIS is short for Internet Information Services. So it is conjuring a minified version of that and using it to emulate a web server experience when you go into debug mode, which is when you press the F5. Now, if we browse, click home, we see that this is already home. We click about, and we see that link change. So now we have localhost, and your port number may differ from mine. We see home, and we see about. Now, remember, our controller name was called home. So whatever the name of the controller is, that is what will appear, and this will be followed by the name of the view that we have requested. So if I click contact, we see a similar change, home/contact. All right. And then we'll go back to home. It's going to load index anyway, so it doesn't need to indicate anything else. Now we're going to go back to Visual Studio and make a few changes. Now back in Visual Studio, I'm just going to come out of debug mode. Now we're going to add a new view. So I'm just going to take 2 steps down and write public. We know our return type must be action result. And then I'll say test view. Open up our curly braces. And then we know that we have to return view, as that is the value at the very least that our method stub is expecting. Now, if I run in debug mode once again, and then attempt to browse to this view, we should get an error because there is no corresponding file in this folder. So we'll just run that experiment and then we'll build and go ahead accordingly. Now that we have our web app up, we can follow the same path convention that we're used to. So we can just say /home, since that is the controller that we just added that view to. And then I'm going to write in the name of the newly added view, which is test view. And press enter. And then we're greeted with this very unattractive page. But then if we take the time out to appreciate what it is saying, it is letting us know that the view by this name was not found in any of the locations that were searched. So we see that it looked in the views folder, it looked in the corresponding home folder, and then it didn't find any file that would possibly and could possibly have passed as a view file. All right. So that is that kind of error that we would get having not made the correct adjustments to our projects. Now back in Visual Studio, we still have a bit of work to do to get this view up and running. We already created the method stub here. What we want to do is get the file over here. You can right click, click add, and go to view, and then give it the name that we know we want. So that would be test view. Right. And then we'll see a bunch of other options here. We don't need to worry about template, model class just yet. We don't want to tick this, but then we'll see something here about layout page. I mentioned layout pages earlier, but we still have not made it to look at the layout page. But I will just leave this blank for now and click add. And then it goes through this thing called scaffolding. And now we have our newly created view. And it's quite a simple page. Like we said, it's almost a bare bones HTML page that is capable of having some amount of C# text in it. We get the title here in this variable. So it's auto-generating all of this. And I'm just going to write a p tag that says hello world. And I will give it one of those famous bootstrap classes, class, and let's say text-info. So we should get blue text when we render that. Of course, we can Control Shift and B or go to build and click build solution. Either one works, just to ensure that we have no syntax errors in our code. We also see that our new file is created over here. So if we go back into debug mode and then we browse the test view, then we should be greeted with a page with an h2 tag with this generated text, as well as the text that we just added. All right, now that we've made that adjustment, we'll just come back to this page, refresh, or maybe if you pressed F5 from Visual Studio, then it would have loaded to this page. And we see here that we have our h2 tag printing this and our hello world looking blue because we put on the bootstrap class for text info. So we can just come back out of debug mode, and now we know how to add more views to our project. Once again, we go to the controller and we make sure that there is a method stub that has a corresponding name with the view that we want to get to. Alright, now I mentioned the layout page more than once, and I'm now going to give you a quick tour of what is in the layout page. Essentially, the layout page is a generic, reusable template for your pages. You can have more than one layouts, and a case for having more than one layout would be like if you have a system that has a customer facing side and an admin portal, then your portal probably looks differently from the customer facing one. So you can have a layout for the admin side and a layout for the customer facing side, and then that would reduce the need to do the repetitive stuff over and over and over. Repetitive stuff meaning including your scripts and doing the HTML skeleton every time, right? So that is why you have such a very scaled down version of a view file over here. But then in the shared folder under views, you have a layout.cs HTML file. And you go into this and you're now bombarded with a bunch of HTML. But if you take a step back and you just go through it, you see that it's regular. It's doc type, it's HTML, we have our head tags. Inside that we have some meta declarations for our char set and for responsive web design purposes. These are Bootstrap required at the very least. We see here where the title is being set dynamically, if we remember. So if we go back to test view, we see that here we set viewbag.title to be test view. In the layout file, it is changing with each page that it has to render. And then the static part of it, which says my ASP.NET application. Since we're doing a school management system, I'll change that to school management system. All right. And then some of the declarations here, these functions are C# functions. So we see here our @ sign signifying that we're superimposing some C#. And then styles is a static class, which is calling a function called render, which is then passing in some parameters, which if you look at the HTML that gets generated from this, you will see the actual code linking all of our files from our content folder. All right. We won't get into that right now. Later on, we'll explore that in more detail. I just want you to appreciate what you're looking at. And then we render some of the scripts. In this case, we're really rendering just Modernizer because that has to go ahead of everything else. But then below, that is where we're rendering the other scripts such as jQuery and Bootstrap and setting some parameters. All right. Now, if we just scroll through and look at it, we see body. We see here we're adding a navbar Bootstrap style. All right. We see here that we have an action link. So we have an object called HTML, and it has a function called action link, which is taking a few values as parameters. All right. So here I'm just going to change application name, as I'm sure we remember on our page, we see application name coming up every time on each page, right? We would want it to say application name. We would actually want to give it the name it should be. So this would be school management system. And then we have a navbar, home, about, contact. If we look here, we see that this is our navbar, and we have each of those links, home, about, and contact. Now we just created a test view. We would like for it to be in the navbar that we can browse to it at will. So I'm just going to Control D, and that duplicates the line. And then we can just modify this. So I'll just say test view. All right. So the first block of text speaks to what is it you want to print on the navbar. The second block speaks to the actual method that it should look for. So remember, in the controller, we want to look for the method by the name test view. Notice there's no space here because we don't put spaces in our method names, but we have to say it as it is here. And it is not case sensitive. If you want to use lowercase here or use lowercase here, or you browse it with lowercase, it will all be the same thing. However, I put a space with this one because we wouldn't want to print the camel cased test view to our user. So we print what we want to our user here. And then the controller is home. So this last parameter speaks to the controller. So if you take a careful look at home, you would see that we're printing home in our navbar here. However, it is linking to the index method inside of our home controller. So it is linking to our index method in our home controller, which then searches for the view called index and then renders that. However, we're telling the user it's home. All right. And then as we go down in our layout, we'll see here in our body content div that we're rendering body. So render body really speaks to the actual rendering of the CS/HTML view file inside of this entire layout, which is why all of them are being rendered with a navbar and with a footer. And we saw our footer had our copyright sign, the year, and some random text which would have been generated my ASP.NET application. So since we're changing out all of those occurrences of my ASP.NET application, we want to ensure that they all say school management system. So I just copied that and I'm just pasting it here. And then I can Control Shift and B and build and make sure I have no syntax errors. And then we can go back into debug mode and see all of our changes. So I'll press F5 to enter debug mode. So when our page loads, we see here that we have all of our changes reflecting. We have school management system printed here instead of application name. We have our test view now added to our navbar, and we have our footer reflecting our page. So if we want to start changing contents, evidently we wouldn't want to have a school management system with ASP.NET printed out right there. We'd want to change the content and so on. Then we'd have to go into our view files, clean out the content, and start putting in all of our custom content for each page. All right. So I hope you appreciate how views and controllers work and how they all tie back to the layout page, and how you can effectively go about adding more content and functionality to your website. See you again next time.